Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this edition of 30 on Thursdays. Today we're going to talk about employee onboarding using Nintex and Cosign. But before we get into that, I want to get into a couple of housekeeping items. If this is your first time, again, 30 on Thursdays is a bi-weekly 30-minute webinar series that we've been hosting for about 2.5 years now on all aspects of SharePoint. Our next one is coming up Thursday, September 26th. It's Lock It Down, Securing Your SharePoint Environment, and that one will be hosted. I'll host it, but Liam Cleary will be on doing the material. There's a full schedule of upcoming webinars at sharepoint.protiviti.com/webinars. Today's session is being recorded, so if you have to duck out early or for whatever reason, we'll have it available probably within the next 24 hours on our site. And you can get to our entire back catalog of 30 on Thursdays and other webinars at sharepoint.protiviti.com/archived-webinars. During today's session, and I'm actually going to be double duty as moderator and presenter, you can use the question window at the right within GoToWebinar, and I'll answer all the questions if there are any at the end. Some other educational opportunities that we have coming up here at Protiviti is a series of roundtables talking about what's new in SharePoint 2013. These are all completely complimentary free, typically happen over breakfast. There's a list of cities coming up, so we're doing a little bit of a roadshow where we'll be talking about SharePoint 2013. So I hope to see you out at one of those. In addition, if you like this format for learning more about SharePoint, we do offer a number of more structured learning opportunities, classes, if you will, that range from 3 hours in format up to multiple days in format. And up on the screen there is an entire list of the ones we've coming up for the remainder of the year. You get the entire schedule at sharepoint.protiviti.com/online classes. So again, I'm going to be both moderator and presenter today. I'm Steve Witt with Protiviti, and I typically host the 30 on Thursdays. Today's topic is going to be kind of a redo for me in a 30-minute format of a case study I did at our SharePoint conference on employee onboarding using Nintex and Cosign. So what we're going to walk through is a very specific example of something that we work with a client on to do employee onboarding. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump into it. The agenda. What I hope to cover in the about 25 minutes that we have for lecture and demo is just give a quick overview of what the client's business needs were, why we chose the solution that we did, actually go in and look at the solution, do a demo, talk a little bit about lessons learned, and then leave some time for questions. So it's a lot to cover in 25 minutes. So I'm going to jump right into it. So can't mention the client's name; it is confidential. But I can tell you a little bit about what they were up against and what their business case was, if you will. This client serves multiple markets, and they do bulk onboarding for projects, for lack of a better word. So they're onboarding anywhere to 20 and 40 employees at a time at various positions. They use a lot of interns, but it goes all the way up to consultant type positions at various locations throughout their firm, and again, sometimes full-time and sometimes they're interns. This client also uses Dynamics CRM. We'll touch on that a little bit at the end on why that's important for the solutions that they picked. So the business driver here was, as I mentioned, they're onboarding 20 to 40 people at a time. It was a completely paper-based process. So as we all probably can relate to as we've gone through, switching jobs or, our first job, as a new hire, you have to complete anywhere from 15 to 20 different forms in this particular organization that were all done by paper. So they would have to create the forms. They would have to send the forms out. They would have to stay on people to return the forms. They would have to track the forms. They would have to get them approved by the management and HR, and ultimately they would have to store them in the employee file. And that took 3 full-time employees to manage just this portion of the process, which was the creation, dissemination, and management and storage of these forms. So when the client came to us, they had very limited development resources on staff, i.e. they were using SharePoint, but they were using it and enabled the business to use it. They wanted to be able to maintain and update the process themselves without writing custom code or modifying maybe custom code that we had written. They had been burnt by vendors in the past, SharePoint vendors, before coming to us here at Protiviti. So we definitely wanted to stay away from any custom code writing, anything proprietary that couldn't be easily moved, just to mitigate any risk on that front. And they were already, as I mentioned, actively using SharePoint 2010. So we'll jump into the very specific requirements that they had for this onboarding process, which was they wanted to automatically provision the forms for each new hire. And these forms were a mixture of Word, PDF, and InfoPath forms. And you would basically get different forms and different logic based on your location, right? So if you're talking about a W-9 or W-4 or whatever for a particular state, then depending on what state the office was in, you would want to generate and give them a different form. And different forms for different positions and different forms whether you're full-time, part-time, or an intern. So a lot of possibilities, right, from the format of the form to what actual form you get. So they wanted that all to be automated. They wanted to basically put these on an employee dashboard when they would log in to the SharePoint for the first time. There would be all their forms. They would want to route the documents to HR for approval. And here's the kicker: because of the nature of their business, for compliance purposes, they needed a digital signature. So all of these documents needed to be signed electronically, and not only signed electronically, but with a digital signature. And then they wanted to file these in an HR site when done. So employee gets the forms, signs them to go to HR, HR approves them, and then they end up in a final repository where they would keep them for audit purposes and other things. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, you kind of had this build versus buy decision, which you kind of go through anytime you're looking at a solution. And in this case, the three rules that often govern build versus buy is the business need unique? Are there any off-the-shelf products that do exactly what they want? And is the interface complex? And if you can answer yes, or if you can basically say it's unique, nothing off the shelf exists, and it's complex, then it's a good opportunity to build it and build it yourself from scratch, maybe write some code. In this case, we didn't have all three of those, so we didn't have a completely unique business case. Employee onboarding is one of the most common uses for SharePoint and for workflow within SharePoint. We were able to find some off-the-shelf products that would allow us to do it. It didn't do it by just plugging it in and turning it on, but by doing some simple configuration without writing code, we were ultimately able to configure the solution, and the interface was not too complex. So where we ultimately landed was using Nintex Workflow, and this is all for SharePoint 2010, and we'll look at this in a second. But one of the reasons we chose Nintex Workflow is it's a SharePoint-based solution, so it sits right on top of SharePoint. We knew this was going to be a SharePoint-based solution itself, so it didn't need to work outside and sit outside of SharePoint. Everybody was very comfortable having it right within SharePoint. And Nintex's target from a workflow perspective is at business users, IT staff, and developers, but kind of getting it available to make it workflow readily accessible for everyone, and doing that with a powerful but easy-to-use interface. So that's the reason the client really liked it. It was its ease of use. You didn't really need to install an initial client application on local machines. It all ran in the browser. It had tracking and reporting. It was easy to update. Anything that we did, they could update, and they could leverage this investment for other business processes. So if we go back to our technical requirements, we basically were able to check with the use of Nintex Workflow, check off 90% of our requirements. The sticking point here, though, was they needed to have these signed digitally. So first reaction is, well, I can just use the electronic signature feature in Word, right? Well, not so much, because digital signature is a little bit different than electronic signature. And they're often used interchangeably. But digital signatures, to get technical, is actually a subset of electronic signatures, and it does three things that you really don't get with electronic signatures, and that is guaranteeing the identity, the intent, and the integrity of the document that was signed. And that, for this particular client, is what they needed. So that's the solution that we ultimately recommended, was co-signed digital signatures from ARX. I'll skip over this because I think we're a little bit short on time, but this gives you a little idea of the architecture of digital signatures. And why the client liked it was a true digital signature solution, so you could check the box that it's standards-based. and it is a true digital signature, which you get the 3 eyes that I mentioned earlier. Also, what's unique about Cosign was it already had a SharePoint integration module and a Nintex integration module, and it would allow them to sign all these multiple documents. So if you remember at the beginning, the requirements were InfoPath, PDF, and Word documents, and those were all accommodated by Cosign. So I'm going to talk about this actually in the demo piece, but this is a kind of a quick walkthrough of the solution that we built for the client, kind of step by step. But I think it would be easier or better served looking at the actual SharePoint environment. So enough PowerPoint for now. So what I'm going to do first is I'm logged in as an administrator on a SharePoint 2010 site for a fictional organization that we have called APES. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a new employee. And as I go through this, I'll give you a little bit behind-the-scenes view of some of the things going on within SharePoint in terms of the different lists that we have, as well as the workflow itself, so you can see how the workflow is built out. Because we're actually going to use multiple SharePoint sites, multiple SharePoint lists and libraries, and multiple Nintex workflows to facilitate this onboarding process. So the first thing is we have a list of new hires, appropriately called new staff. It has some people already in there. I'm actually going to create a new one so you guys can see the form. And this is just a simple SharePoint list form. The employee I want to create is Sam Madison. His email is sam.madison@sqtdemo.com. He's actually based out of Erie, which is my hometown. He's a consultant. He's full-time. And then here's an interesting piece. So there's a domain login, so Sam Madison. And we'll see where we use that a little bit later. And then there's a spot to put in the manager. We go ahead and hit save. And you'll see it simply added that. And the first thing that happened here is you'll see that it actually kicked off a workflow. This is the new staff workflow. And this is the workflow I'm going to take a look at here in a second that's actually going to create all the documents that Sam's going to need when he logs in for the first time on his employee portal to sign and complete. So jumping over to Nintex, so this is, if you haven't seen Nintex before, this is the Nintex workflow design interface. And in here, all in the browser, using something that Nintex refers to as actions, you can simply drag and drop different actions. There's over 100 that come bundled out of the box, and build out your business process, much like you would do using something like Visio or any other type of business process designer. So in this case, I'll just walk you through real quick what's kind of happening as the workflow is running in the background. So it's going through and setting some variables and getting information that it needs to ultimately create the documents that it needs to create. But the first thing it's actually going to do, interestingly enough, is it's going to go out to the final location in the employee document site, and it's actually going to create this employees folder. And so one of the actions that you have available in Nintex is the ability to create list items, document libraries, things like that right within SharePoint. In this case, we're going to use the SharePoint action that allows you to create a folder, and we're actually going to give it a naming convention based on Sam Madison's information. The next thing it's going to do is actually going to run 2 parallel actions, and in the production version, there's actually 3, right? There was one for InfoPath forms, one for PDFs, and one for Word documents. And what it's going to do is actually going to create the documents needed and distribute them. So the way this client's business requirements were set up is the Word documents would live in the SharePoint site natively and be available there for signature, along with the InfoPath forms. The PDF documents, they actually create those and email them to the person to fill out and then ultimately return. These are some that didn't need to be signed digitally. They just needed to be filled out, acknowledge that I got the internet privacy policy, something like that, and then return. So those were actually emailed. And you can see here at the bottom of this workflow, there's a send notification. And what it does is after it generates all of those documents, it sends them to the employee in an email. So this workflow is going to take care of creating all the documents that the user needs and putting them in their proper locations. So again, we're going to look at, and we're going to log in here in a second as Sam Madison to see what he would see. But this just shows you, for this one particular workflow, and there's a couple of others used in this process, how easy it is to go in and modify, if you want to modify your naming convention, or if you want to add additional steps in the process. You know, you just simply use the drag and drop feature. You can pull these things over from the side and put them in there and then publish your workflow. So with that, I'm going to jump over here back to our new employee portal. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to log out and I'm going to log in as, so you notice here, Andrew Kirch, who I'm logged in as, who's kind of like an administrator, has no documents to sign as an employee. But if I sign in as a different user, you'll see this would represent what Sam Madison would see the first time he logged into the employee portal. Here are all the documents available and that are ready for him to sign. And you'll see that you have, in this case, because I selected Pennsylvania, you actually have the Pennsylvania W-4 document. They're all labeled so you can tell that they're unique based on a naming convention that is first letter of last name and full first name. But that naming convention could be anything. This is what this particular client wanted in terms of a naming convention. So now that I'm the employee and I come in here, I've got a couple of options. Now this is a particular type of Word document that has a lot of macros in it. So it's not actually a docx, it's a docm document. So in order to sign it, I'm going to go ahead and edit Microsoft Word. Go ahead and hit OK. I'm probably going to have to authenticate again. Okay, let me slide this over so you can see it. All right, so you should be seeing a Word document here. Now this one was already signed, but here you can see the digital signature. So in this case, I'm using CoSign has a couple of different ways that you can sign documents. So you can sign documents locally on the local PC, which involves installing a client. You also have the ability of signing it directly in SharePoint, which is only for specific document types. So in this case, because it was a macro-enabled document, you actually have to open it up in Word and use and you'll see, because the digital signatures is installed, you actually see the ability to sign it with CoSign. You can just simply come in here and I can get signature details, and if it wasn't signed, I could click sign. But in this case, I already had this document signed and saved locally. But you could do that right here. A third option that CoSign provides is actually the ability now to sign in the cloud. Where SharePoint maybe isn't a fit, and where using it in the native application like Word isn't an option, maybe you want people to sign mobilely where the documents live in a G Drive or SkyDrive or Dropbox. You can use their mobile app, which is all kind of HTML5 to sign it that way. And in the back end, all you're basically doing is you're authenticating against a CoSign appliance, putting in credentials, picking what signature you're going to use, the reason that you're signing the document, and then it basically locks this document down. So you can see here it already has valid signature on it. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit save. Hopefully that'll work. And then once this document is saved, another workflow is going to pick it up and it's going to move it over to HR for approval. So hopefully I can get this one. Maybe I should try a different document. All right, we'll sign the. All right, so if you go in here and look at the workflows on this document, this one isn't running yet. Let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and sign a different one. pardon me while I authenticate. Okay, go ahead and enable editing. I'm going to come down here. This will give you an example. Go ahead and sign. Now, I'm already authenticated and used to my local client, but you can see if I had multiple signature types, maybe I had a formal signature and a more casual signature, I can pick which one. I hit sign, and now my document is signed. And basically, if somebody tries to modify this, it's going to break the integrity of the signature. So all I need to do now is close it. And wait for the screen to refresh here. Taking a little longer than usual. All right, looks like my site is getting really slow for some reason. So I'll walk you through the next step because we only have about 6 minutes left, and I want to leave some time for some questions. So what would basically happen next is, and I already have this loaded. So again, I was logged in as Sam Madison here, who is the actual employee, and sign it. But then if I came over here, I actually moved sites. So all the work that Sam did and where we created the documents initially was in one team site called New Employee Portal. But actually we have departmental sites, and there's a departmental site for HR. And once that document is signed, it moves that document, basically removes it from the New Employee Portal and moves it over to HR, but it's not in its final resting place yet. So it creates another workflow, kicks off, and basically says, okay, there is a new, this document, now that it's signed, needs to be reviewed by someone in HR. So that workflow kicks off, assigns, in this case, it's Andrew Kurtz, a task that he would need to go and complete, review it, and then approve it. And then once that document is approved, that document is then moved to another location, and it's just basically moved from one library to another of an area that is more like the filing cabinet. And this is where you could have, document retention policies, another thing attached. Now that it's no longer a working document, it's kind of a final sealed document. They're just moving it to another location. And if I go in here, and I can show that to you. All right, so the new hire documents is where they come over when HR approves it, and once it's finally approved, they would go into the final store. So if you remember back to the beginning where we created that list item and entered Sam Madison's information, one of the first steps of the workflow was to actually create this folder. So you'll see that that folder is created here. And once that was approved, signed, approved by Andrew Kurtz in HR, and he basically said this is approved and it didn't need any additional signatures, it would ultimately reside here in the employees folders where it has more type security, more document retention policies. So you can see how using a sequence of different workflows, we can move things from one to the other, from one site to the other, and have our different business processes managed with these different workflows, and all the while using the digital signature component to make sure that we're meeting our compliance standards that we needed for the regulatory documents, if you will, that this client needed. So it's 1:56. I'm going to jump back into the PowerPoint real quick so that we can then take some questions. So again, this is the process we walk through. We log into the portal, the documents are waiting, they're signed, HR approves the rejects, and if it's approved, the packet of documents is moved to the HR site. Oh, the one thing I forgot to mention was that workflow, in addition to moving it to the HR site, sends the final approved versions to the employee so that they have a copy. And if for some reason the HR person needs to kick it back to the employee, the workflow allows them to do that. It basically moves the document back over to that New Employee Portal with comments that they would have to go in and change and then resubmit. over again. So with this process and using these tools and everything, we were able to accomplish a number of different things. And the benefits and ROI for this particular solution was we were able to take that extremely paper-based process and move it to electronic. And the outcome of that was the 3 people managing the process became 1, so that the other 2 people could go do maybe other more high-value things or just be repurposed somewhere else. So, you know, when you're looking for you're always looking for quantifiable return on investment anytime you do a technology initiative. And here is something where we were able to go from 3 to 1 and making it completely automated. You have better governance of the process because this is all automated. You have better control of what is where and being able to see where things are and who's accountable and, you know, how long it took people to sign things. Easy to use, right? So we saw that it's all in the browser. You can drag and drop. You can double-click, open up, make modifications, so it's easy to maintain. And ultimately, it was in compliance with the internal mandates, which is it was, you know, digitally signed, and it's stored in the right location for the right amount of time, and all that. So this was a real win for the client in the fact that they were able to do all this, and they were able to do all this without custom code writing. We were able to take a couple of solutions that natively work very well together, do some configuration that they could ultimately maintain, and produce a solution that met their business needs. So lessons learned from this process, you know, I think without the compliance and regulatory requirements up front, that could have quickly threw us a curveball down the road, but they were very upfront with us in terms of the compliance and regulatory requirements that they had to meet, and that's allowed us to get the Cosign solution in there from day 1. Start with a well-documented process, and they had a good process documented. It just had to be done all with paper. Get departmental buy-in, so getting HR on board with what we were doing. This particular solution was driven out of IT because IT analysts were helping to manage the process. Have clear goals. You know, what is success when this is all done and implemented? Is everybody going to feel good about the money and effort spent? And that's having clear goals. And in this case, we had pretty clear goals as we wanted to automate a paper process and be able to meet these checkbox requirements. And like anything, the devil's in the details. You know, making sure that you fully understand what documents need to be signed, what type, what's the limitation on digital signatures for different types of documents, and how these things are going to be moved around. So like anything, you know, the deeper you can get into your requirements, the better. And the sooner you can do that in the process, the better. So real quick, they were able to use these tools for a couple of other process improvements. So again, this wasn't a one and done using Nintex. At the end of this process, right, so these people are being onboarded for a project. At the end of the project, they get offboarded. So there's a 360 review process that's all automated and integrates with Dynamics CRM. So Nintex comes with some actions that natively integrate with CRMs. We're able to use that where the project information is stored and go out to the employees that took part in the project and allow them to review each other and review the project and provide feedback, kind of that 360 view that HR wanted at the time when the project was complete and everybody was done, so you have that historical information as well. So that was a fast follower onto what they did. The other thing they did, and again, this all relates to the same type of process that this client goes through, was able to use the Nintex workflow product to automate the project site creation. So CRM is where they're doing all of their management of you know, these projects in terms of creation and approval and things like that. But once approved, they're using the workflow product to go out and provision the team site, making sure the right people have access. And that's important because of the type of business that they're in, they're making sure that those sites are locked down and only people who are on the team or in certain executive levels have access to what's going on in that project. And they were able to automate that process and reduce any human errors, et cetera, using the same Nintex tool. So with that, we're right at the top of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and go into any questions or comments as we wrap up today. It looks like there's a couple questions waiting for me already. So first question is, would this work in Office 365 synced with ADFS? Again, to answer that question a couple of ways. So first of all, our authentication in the environment we just looked at, Sam Madison, Andrew Kurtz, et cetera, are actually Office 365 accounts that we use. So we have an Office 365 account that we use for different things, for R&D and demo purposes. So this is actually already integrated. Now, the Nintex component and the Cosign component in this case are all on-prem, but Nintex is in the process of rolling out their SharePoint Online forms and workflow products, and I believe Cosign will have, if they don't already, I know it's in the pipeline to have a cloud-based Office 365 version of the Cosign connector as well. So I think the answer to that question is you can certainly use it in a hybrid environment where you have things in Office 365 and you have things in on-premise. And I didn't get into a lot of Nintex in terms of the actions, but there are actions in Nintex that allow you to, just like you can write and create documents and move documents to other on-premise SharePoint sites, you can actually move them to Office 365 sites as well. So I hope that answers the question. The next question is, in creating the various documents that needed to be signed, was it Nintex that generated the documents or some other software behind the scenes? So one of the things that we didn't look at, but I can show you real quick, is in the background, in the lists within, in the document libraries, I'll go in and view all site content here. We actually had all the documents set up, so there's a template library. So, excuse me, if you remember we saw a PAW4. There's a PAW4 out there in Word format. We just use the workflow in Word services to do, excuse me, the provisioning of that document. So these documents were not created from scratch. They already resided out there. And to that end, there was also a list. Let me find it. There's a document list, which tells you what document goes with which office, which with employee status, which title of employee. So we're using all these SharePoint lists and interconnecting them with a list that really defines, all right, when we do a lookup for Sam Madison and he's in Pennsylvania and he's actually in the Erie office, then we know what documents to create for him and to put on his dashboard. So those actual Word documents and PDF documents and InfoPath documents are already pre-configured templates that are, standard for the organization. We're just going in and manipulating them and putting them in the right spot based on certain metadata related to the user. Next question is, can this cross site collections? And looking at the workflow tool, yes, as I mentioned, you can go out to Office 365. You can go to other SharePoint site collections. Nintex is pretty flexible in where you can turn it on and off and where you can use it. And because it's a SharePoint solution that leverages heavily the SharePoint API, you can write it out to, so if you wanted to move your document from one site collection to the other, you absolutely can do that. All right, we're about 5 after the hour, and that looks like our last question, I believe. If you have any additional questions, let me go ahead and put my information back up there. My email address is on there, stephen.witt@protiviti.com, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have about this particular solution or any other solutions or topics that we've covered here on 30 on Thursdays. And again, in 2 weeks, we'll have Liam on to talk about protecting your data and SharePoint security, and we'll hope to talk to you all then or see you all then. Thanks.